everyone. Today I want to show you go through each of the lowercase letters. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be combining all of these basic strokes together to make letters. And so what I've got here is my tracing paper over the top of a sheet that's in the brush lettering for beginners guide. And so I'm just going to use this as my guide for today. I'm going to have this bottom line as the baseline, waistline, ascender. So that's going to be the height of my letters. So I'm just going to put my tracing paper over the top and start with A. And we'll just go through each of them and kind of talk about them. So the A is made up of an O form and an underturn. And so start over here at the 2 o'clock position, draw your O form, and then come up here to do the underturn, and you have an A. Then for a B, we're going to do an ascending loop, end at the baseline, lift up, and then we're going to do another O form, and we're going to loop and come out here. The reason why we do that is because each letter has to be able to connect to the next letter, right? So we're going to end that here because if it was a word, the next letter would go here. So there's a B. Then we have a C, which is similar to an O form, but instead of starting, you start a little bit to the left with the C. So start here with thin, go up and down, and then you have to kick it out a little bit to the side. And I like to add a little thickness to the top. And so sometimes that's really tight, so I didn't get it quite kicked out enough to the side. But you want it kicked out so that it can connect to the next letter. So C, then a D. We're going to do an O form. And then just a straight line that turns into an underturn. Another way to do a D would be to do the O form, and then you could do an ascending loop. So add a loop to the top of the D. Then there's the E, which is similar again to an O form, but we're going to start in between the baseline and the waistline. And we're going to do a small loop, and then add thickness and come back up. E, then F, start at the midline here and do an ascending loop. This one goes, it's an ascender and a descender. That's the longest letter, and then comes up to the baseline, and then a thin upstroke back up to the, it comes up to the baseline and then a upstroke to the waistline. Then a G, I'm running out of guide. And we'll just go to the next line. I'm like, I never want to waste my paper, my tracing paper, so I always line it up so I'm not wasting any. So E, F, and then G is an O form, and then a descending loop. And with this one, you can always do different things with the descending loops. So you can make it a lot bigger. You could add another loop on the bottom, which is kind of fun to do. Or just, I guess that's not a loop, it's a closed loop. But so you can do some different things that are kind of fun with the descenders and ascenders. So G, H is going to start at the waistline and do an ascending loop and then stop at the baseline. Something that's important, I think, is to lift your pen after each stroke. I think it gives you more control as you're drawing the letters. And then this would be a compound curve for the H. We have an I, which is just an underturn. Dot it. Something with the dots that I like is instead of doing a tiny dot, it kind of just looks unbalanced. So just making sure that you do use the whole side of the brush to give a dot that's about the same width as your actual letter. So there's a J. And then we need to do a K. So we'll start at the waistline and do an ascending loop. Come to the baseline and do a small loop. That's called an S shape. It's a backwards S shape. And that's mostly just on the K is the place that you use that. And then one other way you could do a K is instead of doing a loop, you could just do a thin line like that. So it's up to you, whichever you prefer. K's are really hard for me for some reason, so I struggle with those ones. K. K-L. Start at the waistline, do an ascending loop, bring up to the center line, down, and then back up to the waistline. M. We're going to do upstroke into the M, downstroke, underturn, compound curve. N, upstroke, downstroke, compound curve. O, there's two ways to do an O. Well, I mean, there's tons of ways, but the two ways that I'm going to show you are just do your regular O form and then do a comma dot at the top, and that's like this little shape. Just looks like this. That's right there, and it's on the O, the V, the W. There's a few letters that have it. You can also, instead of doing a comma dot, you can make it a loop, which is the example in your guide. And so that one is just an open. So instead of having it be closed, it's as if that comma dot now becomes a loop. So there's an O. Then P has a descending line. I forgot the upstroke right there. And then the O form. And another way to do a P that I saw today that I really like is do a thin line up like that, which is just kind of fun. Okay, so P and then a Q is an O form, and then it's a backwards descending loop. So you're going to come down but loop it backwards, and then you can do a small upstroke there. Q, R, move our paper up a little bit. R is one that, an S, that are a little bit different or unique. So here, if you're looking, that's my X height. So my baseline and my midline. So all my other letters have been fitting in that space. So like my A was fitting, you know, right there. But with an R and an S, they actually extend slightly above. They come up to like here, the X height. And I'll draw it with, like within a word, and you'll see why it makes a difference. So you do an upstroke, and then it's downstroke with that little wave in it, or you can come up and do a loop. So for example, if we were to write it in a letter or in a word, right? So if we're going to write R, so A, if we just stay at the baseline for all the letters, that's what it would look like. Or if it extends above, I kind of exaggerated that one a little bit, but it just looks a little bit more balanced. You can see here it just looks a little bit squat, like what is that thing? Where here it's a little more, you can tell that it's supposed to be an R. So that's an R. And the S is similar, that it also extends a little bit above the waistline. So you come up and you can do it with a loop or without. So that's without a loop. And then you could do it with a loop with two loops. So those are a couple examples of that. Then let's go to the T. This one comes down. It's like an underturn, but a really tall on the one side. And then crossbars are always a thin line. You could also lead into it, you know, with an upstroke, like that. T. Then there's the U, which is a U, or an underturn, sorry, and then another underturn. 2 in a row. A V is an underturn with the comma dot shape, or you could do it with a loop. W, an underturn, and a comma dot, or you could do an underturn, and a loop. I didn't really give myself a lot of space to do that loop. So there's W. X. X's are hard for me. So you're gonna do, this is again where you're gonna see that S shape. I guess it's X's really, and the K. If you look here, the K and this X, you're kind of having the same shape, and then you're gonna do a thin upstroke. So X, Y is gonna be an underturn and a descending loop. This is again one of those ones like the G, the descending loop. You can really exaggerate it, you can change it a lot just with that little loop. And then a Z, you can either have no loop here, or you can add a loop to it. It doesn't look as good to me, but something else I was going to show you. So these are all the letters, right? But going into the letters, a lot of them I don't show it, but there's a couple ways you can do it. So if we're going to do, let's do the Y a few more times. So the Y, we can come into it this way, or we could do more of an upstroke like that. So I use this type more if it's at the beginning of a word. So like if we're spelling yay, I would do it like that because it's the beginning. Maybe you could do it the other way too, but see, this one is more how it leads in here, if that makes sense. So that's a little bit about the lead in. So those are just the lowercase letters, and then you just have to practice them. And you can also, if you're wanting to try more of like a bouncy style or something different, right? Like just extend different parts of the letters, right? So if we're doing, maybe we'll do it over here. If we're doing an H, come up, we can have the loop meet lower. You know, we could do a smaller underturn and have it come low like this. Or, you know, we could really exaggerate the ascending loop and have that be really exaggerated, and that could be tiny. And so that's how you get some different styles, is you just exaggerate or change different parts of the letters and just play with it. And so good luck. I think you're gonna do great. It's super fun to do the lowercase letters and just practice, and all the basic strokes lead into these letters, or the foundations for these letters.